Going into 2019, comic book movies are the hottest films at the box office. So today I'm going to give you my 10 picks for the best superhero movies of all time. So let's talk about it. Hi, if you're new here, my name is SeanChandler, and I started this channel essentially because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, I'd love it if you would share your list down below in the comments section. What are your absolute favorite superhero movies? We're going to disagree, and that's the fun part, that we can talk about our differences. Before we get started, you might notice some variation between this list and some of my previous lists. That's essentially because here I'm factoring in importance and impact to a greater degree. Finally, this video is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download of your choice and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/SeanChandler. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. I'm actually a huge fan of Audible. Last year I listened to over 50 books on their app. I recommend checking out Slugfest. It's a book telling the 50-plus year history of the rivalry between Marvel and DC. You can listen to it for free if you sign up for a free trial at audibletrial.com/SeanChandler. With that said, let's get started. Kicking things off at number 10 is The Incredibles. This is the most successful original superhero story ever released in theaters, and for good reason. Superficially speaking, the action is vibrant, lively, and creative. It's also got nice touches of humor sprinkled all throughout the entire film, and there's no shortage of little quotable and memorable moments.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
But there's two things going on here that really elevate things to the next level. First off, there's incredible world building going on throughout the entire film. From the retro 60s design to the spy vibe to the history that's sprinkled throughout the entire film very efficiently, Brad Bird crafts a world that you like to go and visit. Second, it's about characters dealing with relatable problems. They may have incredible powers, but at their core, they're characters dealing with very real and human problems. What Pixar was able to do here was nothing short of incredible. Coming in at number 9 is Spider-Man. This is the first mega hit of the modern comic book movie era. Blade and X-Men may have cut the path, but Sam Raimi charged full speed down it. The film tells a fairly straightforward version of one of the classic comic book origin stories, but Raimi's quirky creative choices give it a very distinct flavor. Besides the film's pop music soundtrack, the movie almost feels like it exists in a time of its own, and Danny Elfman delivers a fantastic score. While some of the special effects may seem a little bit dated now, at the time the movie came out, we'd never seen these types of fluid, large-scale movements through a city. What makes so much of it work are the great characters. Of course, Spider-Man is one of the most relatable superheroes out there, but he's also surrounded by a great set of side characters, in particular the spectacular Green Goblin as portrayed by Willem Dafoe. I know a lot of people prefer the second film because it's great, but for me, I love an origin story, and this movie just hits all the right notes for me. At number 8 is Iron Man. When they first announced this film, no one on planet Earth, including Kevin Feige, could have predicted where this thing was going to end up 10 years later. They started with a B-grade comic book character with little mainstream exposure, a washed-up, has-been actor with a very troubled past, and the director of Elf. And they launched what is arguably the biggest and most consistent film franchise of all time. Compared to what the MCU has grown into, this film almost feels quaint in its very small scale, and that's part of what makes it work. This movie did two things that were incredibly important for creating this universe. First off, Favreau nailed the tone. He found a way to be funny without being cheesy or campy. He also found a way to be dramatic without falling into melodrama. He found that perfect balance that was pivotal for building all of these franchises. Right out of the gate, he established himself as the star of this universe by having unbelievable charm by himself, as well as having great chemistry with everyone. He makes everyone around him better. If Favreau hadn't nailed this film, and if Robert Downey Jr. hadn't knocked it out of the park, we wouldn't have the MCU that we know and love today. Real quick, I'm gonna give you a few DC honorable mentions. First up, we've got Man of Steel. I know some people are critical of this film, but I personally love it. Next up, we've got Superman 2. If Richard Donner had actually gotten to complete his version of the film, it would be in the top 10 for me. Then we've got Wonder Woman. This is just a great, fun movie with a nice heart to it and actually explores a few ideas. And of course, we've got Green Lantern. Just kidding. At number 7 is Unbreakable. Coming out the same year as X-Men, this movie was released at the very beginning of the modern era of comic book movies, and because of that, I think this movie was way ahead of its time. Shyamalan's grounded and somber take on the genre throws the fewest actual punches of all the films on this list, but it packs an emotional punch. The score is great and the performances are all very touching. I actually forget that Samuel L. Jackson is in this movie because Samuel L. Jackson, the actor, showed up to set, not the personality. So when I watch the movie, I see Elijah Price. I've always been drawn to stories about identity and discovering your untapped potential, and that's what this movie is all about, looking at these broken characters who discover who they are and what's really inside of them. Because the movie deals with these emotions in such an authentic way, its moments of triumph and revelation are the most emotionally satisfying of this entire list for me. This is a movie that I have absolutely loved ever since I first saw it at Lakeline Mall back in 2000. Coming in at number 6 is The Avengers. Now that we have a big superhero team-up movie coming out every 6 months, it's easy to forget how big of an event this movie really was. Merging 4 different big franchises together into one film had never been done like this before. To get the job done, they hired nerd hero Joss Whedon, who has a real knack for working with ensembles and writing witty dialogue. If Favreau gave us the MCU tone 1.0, Whedon gave us the comedy-infused 2.0 upgrade. Suddenly, after this movie came out, everyone got a lot funnier and had way more one-liners. The story here is fairly straightforward, which means the movie can focus on the rapport of the group as well as the big action set pieces. Because of that, I think that this movie has some of the most fun banter between the characters, as well as possibly the most fun comic book third act final battle that we've ever seen. Everyone gets their moment to shine, and just these awesome, iconic comic booky moments. This movie put a massive grin on my face when it first came out, and nearly 7 years later, it still satisfies. Here's a few Marvel honorable mentions. First up, we've got Spider-Man 2. I know a lot of you guys think this one's even better than the first one because it's pretty fantastic. Next up, we got Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This one just came out, but wow, it made an impact. It's one of the most creative animated films I've ever seen. Then we got Captain America Civil War, a movie that I just think has some great dramatic elements to it and what they were able to do. And then we've got Guardians of the Galaxy, a personal favorite of mine that I absolutely love. In 5th place is Batman Begins. Nolan's grounded take on the Caped Crusader in many ways is the definitive origin story for Batman, largely because this might be the most succinct version we've ever gotten. While still featuring all the excitement and action that you want from the genre, Nolan almost convinces you that the idea of a Batman isn't so crazy, and he does this by taking you on the journey of Bruce Wayne as he attempts to find a way to stop others from facing the pain that he faced as a child. In typical Nolan fashion, the story's told partially non-chronologically. The script overall does a real nice job of tying all the plot lines together by the end of it, and you've got a cast here that's just jam-packed with Oscar caliber talent. And Katie Holmes. If you're going to tell a grounded reimagining of Batman's origin story in a pocket universe without other superheroes, this is how you do it. And number 4 is Logan. This is probably the darkest and most thematically rich film on this entire list. From beginning to end, it's all about death, regret, and redemption. You know, fun stuff. In many ways, the film has a lot more in common with Westerns than most films in the comic book genre. The story and the stakes are relatively small scale, and that's why this film feels so special. It's a final study of these characters that we'd seen on screen for nearly 20 years, and because of that, it has so much extra background and punch to everything that happens. This is the type of film that wows me that it exists, that a studio actually greenlit it. In the midst of an extremely saturated comic book genre, this movie found a way to stand out by avoiding the temptation to go bigger and instead went better and deeper. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to give me your list down below in the comments section. We're going to disagree. That's the fun part. We can talk about our differences. Also, after this video, right up here, I've got a couple videos that might interest you. One is my 10 favorite movies of all time, and the other is my ranking of all the 2018 comic book movies. If you enjoy this video, there's something in there that you'll enjoy. Bringing us into the top 3 is The Dark Knight. Coming off of its fantastic predecessor, Nolan had set the bar very high for himself. Luckily, he was up for the challenge. He did that by looking at the great crime thrillers of all time and taking inspiration. The end result is a plot-heavy film packed with deep themes about the consequences of our actions. Along the way, we get one of the great comic book movie villains of all time in Heath Ledger's Joker, and this character actually plays against our normal expectations for a great villain. We don't really get an origin story. Well, we kind of get 5 origin stories.
Is it the scars? You wanna know how I got them?
He doesn't have a compelling motivation. No, he exists as an ideological opposite for our hero, and he's also a very creepy screen presence. The third act doesn't necessarily have the biggest, most spectacle-based action sequence. Instead, it leans in on the ideas of the film and creates this conflict and this tension between these two boats with a prisoner dilemma. This gives the audience a very different type of satisfaction at the end of the film. Of all the films on this list, this might be the one that showed us just how far you can go in taking this genre seriously. Our runner-up is Avengers: Infinity War. 10 years after Iron Man, the MCU delivered what may be the biggest film of all time, as well as the most comic booky film of all time. For me, this film was an absolute blast and a total success. They managed to bring this massive ensemble of characters together and still tell a compelling story. As both a comic book and a movie fan, it's just incredible to see all these characters together in one film. It's packed with memorable interactions and fantastic action sequences. But what really gives the movie its extra punch is Thanos. They designed him to be this nuanced character that's a true believer in his cause. As ruthless as he can be, he actually in this other way cares about people, and so we feel for his pain at times. And it features that cinematic universe shattering conclusion. Depending on how Endgame plays out, this could be viewed as one of the great cliffhangers of all time. Of all the movies in the MCU that I love, and there's many of them, this is the epitome of all of it, and this is the example of why I think the MCU is the coolest thing happening in movies right now. But in first place is Superman the movie. This is the movie that invented the genre. This is the first time someone decided to make a big event film out of a comic book property and take it seriously. The first 50 minutes of the film telling Kal-El's journey to Metropolis is some of the most beautiful storytelling in any comic book movie. From the destruction of the majestic Krypton to the poignant dialogue between Jonathan and Clark Kent about his powers, Richard Donner takes the material seriously. Here, Christopher Reeves delivers one of the classic superhero movie performances by capturing both the clumsy Clark Kent and the heroic Superman. They're two totally different performances, and he's fantastic at both. And of course, John Williams' score is one of the most iconic and memorable of all time. Every single piece of music perfectly captures the scene that it's in. Now, obviously, the film can feel a little bit dated because the special effects are dated. The movie's over 40 years old, but it also can feel dated because it's so unashamedly optimistic and hopeful. It doesn't feature any of the cynicism or deconstruction of so many of the modern superhero films. Superman is a genuinely good guy that even saves cats out of trees, and I think that's a good thing. So for me, this monumental film comes in at number 1. Remember to check out either my favorite movies of all time or my ranking of the 2018 comic book movies. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.